Welcome everyone, and welcome Cassandra. We have with us Cassandra Lam of Collective Rest. Cassandra is a somatic healing facilitator and community grief tender. And Cassandra, tell us a little more about your work.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to you, Alice, for not only organizing this Love and Power for Gaza series, but also for the incredible work that you do, Conversations Against Fascism. It's almost like you saw it coming in our country. And I just feel really honored to be in relationship and sharing space with you today. But just a little bit more about me for everyone here. My name is Cassandra. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently dialing in from the unceded lands of the Cherokee Nation, specifically the Eastern Band of Cherokee, which is colonially known as Asheville, North Carolina. A couple of things about me. I always like to just share some of my identities and positionalities because I want folks to understand my context and the different lived experiences, as well as biases and stereotypes that I might be subject to. No one's perfect, but I am a first generation American, Vietnamese and Chinese American. Both of my parents are boat refugees after the Vietnam War. So the series, and in fact, this moment in time we're going through collectively is really, really hitting home for me and bringing up a lot of things that my family went through. I am also neurodivergent. I am autistic. I have complex PTSD, and I really, really love the way that my squiggly brain works. I am also born originally on Southern California and spent 8 years living in New York. And I'm now living here in the mountains of Asheville. So I feel I have had the privilege of being a quote unquote coastal elite. And let's see if there's anything else. I have spent most of my career doing community or organizing work in some way before I did Collective Rest. I spent 5 years working on the Cosmos, which was a community for API women and femmes all over the world, but our audience was primarily in North America. And we did a lot of programming around helping our community come into their authentic expression, addressing and creating spaces where people can talk about intergenerational trauma, and other issues and experiences that are specific to folks who are either Asian in America or Asian American. And it was that work that all really led me to Collective Rest. So just a really quick backstory on how I'm doing what I'm doing right now. Collective Rest started in March 2021 in the direct aftermath of the Atlanta spa shootings, where a white supremacist murdered 6 Asian women who were massage workers down in Atlanta. And in my grief, my mom is a nail tech, so I have a lot of close connection to and care for women and femmes of color who are often relegated to really what's considered low wage service workers. But in my grief, I ended up closing my laptop. I had been trying to push through and be strong for my community throughout the pandemic, but that day really broke me. And so I ended up in the bathtub early in the afternoon, just sobbing and sobbing. And I experienced a really profound spiritual experience in the bathtub where I essentially received and channeled from my ancestors the assignment that I was supposed to host a healing circle and share a practice that would be called Collective Rest. And that practice would tie together various trainings and modalities that I had been practicing myself and trained in. And all of it was in service of helping people to feel safe enough to slow down in their bodies. And so the next day, I ended up hosting a healing circle. Hundreds of people from all over the world hopped on Zoom. And the very first Collective Rest session was shared completely free to the community. And to this day, I still do community work completely free because I am really adamant about addressing and acknowledging the systemic barriers to the resources and the means and the actual sense of safety to slow down, which many folks with historically marginalized identities do not have the privilege of. And so that was about 3 years ago, almost coming up on 3 years. And now I feel very lucky to be doing collective rest full time. And my work has expanded to allow me to work with also corporate and nonprofit clients. But all of my work with organizations is really a way for me to fund Robin Hood, if you will, resources so that I can keep doing things for the folks who need it most. And that's actually where Alice and I met. Something that I've been doing over the past couple of years is just trying to share what I know as a somatic healing facilitator and grief tender as widely as possible using Zoom. And that led to some free events sharing practices for grief and rage for Gaza. And so folks might be thinking like, okay, rest work and grief work, they seem pretty different. But
I
I
was gonna
think,
ask that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the one thing maybe one way to answer that or to tie that together for folks is instead of telling you my answer, I would instead just ask whoever's listening to close your eyes for a moment and notice where your gaze goes once your eyes close. Who are you focusing on? What emotions or physical sensations are you perhaps a little bit more attuned to? Where did your thoughts go? And so for most of us, what you'll discover is the moment we close our eyes, we're left to gaze upon ourselves. We're left with ourselves. And the closing of the eyes and this is not metaphor, this is quite literal. When we close our eyes, our focus naturally turns inward. And so rest and grief are very, very related for many reasons that I'm sure we'll get into here today. But I always like to share that little practice because it is when we close our eyes, when we slow down, when we lie down, when we're in the dark, or perhaps when we're alone in solitude, maybe for the first time all day, that our stuff that has been pushed to the side, that has been deprioritized, that didn't make the agenda, our stuff moves to the forefront of our bodies and beings and minds. And for many of us growing up in the West, we've all been really immersed in a death phobic culture. And so that is why rest for many of us who are either raised or socialized or conditioned to Western values, that relationship between rest and grief is very profound because everything that we have not wanted to look at is there waiting for us when we finally slow down.
I realized my question wasn't how are rest and grief related, because actually that is straightforward to me. It was how are rest and rage related, because they seem like opposite ends of the energetic spectrum.
Right. Yeah. Especially when you think about like whether it's the visual you have of like someone in rage or even experiences of your own rage, right? It just feels like such a different expression than rest. I actually really love answering this question. And I like to answer it actually by using my own story, rather than making it conceptual. So the average person in America, I'll just speak to America because that's where I live. The average person walking around America is completely overwhelmed, overstimulated, pulled in a zillion directions in one day, scattered and dispersed in terms of focus, energy. And when I'm saying these things, I'm not talking about like individual blame or responsibility. This is just, I'm really talking about it at like a structural level. This has become sort of the norm, right? Like, I don't think it's uncommon to hear people describing Americans as like zombies, like just kind of we wake up and we go to work and we do the thing and we just keep going. But we're not really a culture that really cares about or spends time on the feeling part, the inner world, some of these other elements. And so on top of that, when you look at how systems of unrest, which is sort of another way of saying systems of oppression, but I also see them as systems of unrest because oppression ensures that you never can rest, you never can slow down. But the way these systems work is, or rather, I would say the reason why the average person shows up and feels this way is due to structural reasons. That is by design. And so what that means is because so many of our basic needs either are going chronically unmet or it's such a struggle to meet them because there really isn't that much safety. Certainly, there's no social support network for Americans. And on top of that, if you layer on your various identities and the ways in which you are either in a position of privilege or in a position of having to overcome or deal with a lot of challenge, this essentially creates a whole deck that's stacked against you. And so when you also layer on the cultural erasure of rest, what I'm essentially doing is just really painting a picture to situate how extremely difficult it is for any average person to be able to move in the world, show up the way they want. And so as a result of all of these forces and pressures, most of us have such a, I would say, a capacity that has been so contracted under the pressures of everything we have to face. And this is before even talking about things looming over us existentially, like climate change, like the political unrest around the election this year in the US, like the suppression and the censorship that's happening around Gaza. And so all of this to say, most of our nervous systems are completely overstimulated, and that has such a big role as it relates to our actual energetic capacity to feel. And so, like, maybe I'll offer us another practice. So, Alice, if you could join me, just take a moment and clench your fist and make a really, really tight fist. Okay. And then with this tight fist, I want you to use your other hand and then just try to just offer this hand some touch and just notice how sensitive or not sensitive your hand is when it's in a fist and when it's clenched.
Yeah, it
Not
doesn't
very
feel much.
sensitive. All right. Okay. And then we'll just take a moment and shake that off. And then this time, I invite you to imagine that your hand were perhaps a flower opening up for the first time in spring. And so I invite you to like keep the palm open and just let the fingers very gently furrow. And really think about softening the fingers. And then taking your hand, I invite you to trace your palm and see how sensitive that is.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty different, right?
Yeah, it's almost ticklish.
Mm-hmm. It can almost be too much. So we're doing this with the hand, but our bodies and our minds are the same way. So all the things that I just named, you can see all of those as forces that generate pressure. And under pressure, we become more tightly closed. Not necessarily even on purpose. This is truly just what happens to us. And so this sort of clenched fist position is great because for certain reasons, because it can help us feel safe. It helps us be protected. It helps us to be vigilant, right? This is that fight or flight or freeze nervous system state. You can think of it as this. And we need armor, quite frankly. The world is not a safe place to walk around as an open hand or a flower that just blooms in spring all the time. But when you live like this chronically, what happens is you start to forget that you also have access to this and that your body's designed to actually move in and out of this and this. And even as I'm doing this movement, I want to also invite folks to think about where else you sort of see this ebb and flow. You might think of the inhale and the exhale. You might think of the ocean wave coming in and crashing out. So this is a natural rhythms, but our world is not safe enough to go in and out. So most of us live like this. Mm. And so it affects the more we live like this, anything that our body, our nervous system, our mind that we feel we cannot handle, we have to push aside. And so when we talk about, when we think about the numbness that's and the apathy that is, I think, very commonplace in American culture, it's almost hard for me to blame individual people because I'm like, oh, this is what we live like all the time. Um, and so what happens is not only is your capacity for, let's say, joy, pleasure, bliss, these beautiful experiences reduced severely when we're like this, um, we also have a tendency to fall more into fear, doubt, mistrust of ourselves. And so the relationship to rest and rage is really critical because the more that we're able to practice rest, what we're actually doing is working through, not well, we're not doing it, the body's own intelligence is working through the backlog of experiences and emotionality that we have in process so that some of that tightness can start to unfurl. And then we can start to move to a place where we're more dexterous emotionally, because that dexterity is what we need to be able to go into a state of surrender like rest, as well as to go into a state of rage. But when you, I mean, this is also like, I think it's going to be a little different person to person. Some folks might have very easy access to their rage, even if they're like
Mhm.
this. I think of like folks, for example, socialize as men.
And
So
men,
when
yeah.
you talk about, yeah, women and femme-identifying folks and queer folks and gender fluid or gender non-conforming folks,
And I
for
would
whom
think
it's not
Asian
okay.
folks too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Asian folks are not allowed to be mad, right? And then, or the other stereotype, like Black women are always mad, right? So there's so many layers, and that also influences how we might have neutralized or not allowed ourselves to express certain things. So there's also nuances there, but I do want to state that the more that we rest, the more that we widen the bandwidth that we have to be able to move in and out of intensities, the more capacity we have for big things to be able to move with them, and the more open and skillful we'll also be in navigating all of that.
Mm. Yeah. So I'm hearing I'm hearing a few things. One is I'm hearing permission, like our own, giving ourselves permission for our body wants to rest, our body wants to rage, our body wants to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
We are not machines, right? And
Mm-hmm.
capitalism literally is about mechanizing
Mm-hmm.
everything,
Yeah.
you know, human beings included, right? Um, and the second thing I'm hearing is kind of a theme of this series and my work in general. If we have choice about or if we have space for our emotions, we have choice about how we use them, right? So our, you know, unexpressed grief is paralyzing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and actually, I do have a question about that. Like when you do, when you give people a chance to somatically express their rage, do you find that people are better able to take action? Or do you find that people are like, okay, I expressed my rage, I can go to bed now? I mean, which actually, right, we do want people to be able to go
Yeah.
to bed. And
Yeah.
we don't want to, we don't want to comfort people out of action.
Right. 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 Yeah. I'm just going to take a moment to let your question land. It's a really juicy one. I think part of this is where I'm really like kind of seeing like yet another like consequence of the cultural erasure of rest. And when I say that, what I mean is like, well, I guess it might be self-evident, but how the function of rest, well, I guess I should firstly say, I don't want to assume people here know. As a human being, we are biologically designed for rest, and we know that when we look at our different biological rhythms. All of us probably know about the circadian rhythm, which governs our sleep and wake cycle. There's probably fewer of us who are aware that we also have something called the basic rest and activity cycle, which a sleep researcher named Nathaniel Kleitman in the 1950s discovered. So it's essentially we go through various stages of sleep when we are lying down at night. REM, deep, light, things like or non-REM. And similarly, when we're in our waking consciousness during the day, we're also cycling through different states. But these states are states of wakefulness, and these states of wakefulness govern focus, concentration, the ability to process information, and also perception.
Oh.
And so what he discovered in his research is about every, let's say, 90 to 120 minutes, about everybody's going to be a little bit different, but at around each one of those intervals, the body has a natural inclination to pull focus. And so if you have ever found yourself opening the fridge for a reason that you cannot name, or you're just like staring out the window, like struggling to finish that email, or you've somehow opened Instagram or Reddit on your phone without even realizing it. First of all, I want to say I'm going to echo the words of Dr. Devin Price, an autistic trans social psychologist who wrote a book, Laziness Doesn't Exist, which I'm also going to recommend. But their research in that book looks at how laziness doesn't exist. And in fact, what I have discovered is what we call laziness is misplaced, because that's actually the body's biology naturally wanting a 15 to 20-minute break, wanting to pull focus, which is going back to so if this is focus, it wants to do this so it can go back to this. And this is the dance. But instead, the 9 to 5, which I would argue it's like a 9 to 7 p.m. like work schedule we have here in America now. And some people even worse, graveyard shifts, like my dad growing up. So when you don't, or you can't, or you don't have the safety to actually honor your body when it wants to pull focus, in order to stay engaged, our body has to actually engage our fight or flight response. And so our body pumps stress hormones, because what we're telling our body is actually, no, this is a danger or a threat in some way to like my safety. I have to get this done. Even though it doesn't sound, let's say it doesn't sound all that serious, right? To you in your mind, you're like, okay, I just got to get this email out before the end of the day. But what's happening on the inside is, in order to tell your body's natural urge that I'm not doing this right now, it means that there's something that you're saying you need to mobilize for. And so it follows that. And so stress hormones flood your body. Your pupils literally change. You get tunnel vision. Your hip flexors engage. So everything in your body, fight or flight, which is great if you're like running away from danger. But if you're sitting on your computer, all of this coalesced to like, by the time you want to wind down at 8 p.m., you're amped up because you've got a lot of energy in your body that was supposed to be used to, let's say, run away from danger or fend off a predator. But what looks like on the outside is you just sitting there. And so people actually feel very confused, and I don't blame them. They're like, wait, I just sat at my laptop. Why am I feeling so anxious and antsy? So I feel like I kind of might have
I
like
think
left your
so.
question.
I think I can connect what you said
Yeah.
to my question though, because when we're using all our fighter, all our like actually makes me think of adrenaline and cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something not everybody might know, but adrenaline is our very short-term stress hormones and intensity hormone, and our long-term stress hormone is cortisol. And adrenaline doesn't actually always feel bad, but cortisol
Mm-hmm.
does. And if we've got this
Yeah.
suppressed rage, we don't have any cortisol and adrenaline left when we need to do when we need
Mm-hmm.
to,
It's been
I
used.
don't know,
It's like
scale a wall or
chronically.
something, right? Or
Yeah.
interrupt a speech, or whatever our rage can be. And this word channel is coming back, channeled into, if we're spending all our energy, like having the rage and fear kind of
Mm-hmm.
be twisted in us. I guess you can't see all the weird things my hands are doing, but
Yeah.
then like, yeah, giving it the space to be focused, even if it's not focused on a real action, but
Mm-hmm.
like something imaginary.
Well, actually, that's a really interesting thing somatically, because I mean, you were there when we did the collective rage for Gaza, and towards the end of this clip, I'll also share like one of the practices we did there. But when it comes to visualization, the mind doesn't know what's real and what's not, right? And so when we're doing somatic practices to help us, let's say, release rage or remove fear, one, when we have emotions and responses that get stifled and that don't get expressed, first of all, they just continue to churn inside of us, like you said. And what happens is each thing also traps a little bit of our life force energy. And so the more things that we have, experiences and emotions that we have that go unprocessed, the more that there are little fragments of our life force energy that are stuck to that. Because life wants movement, life wants us to feel. And that's just like every spiritual and contemplative tradition has different ways of saying that. So that's part one. And then part two, the truth is most of us are probably, many of us, I would say, are probably not going to feel safe expressing our rage, maybe directly to the actual aggressor, right? And also specific to Gaza and Palestine, like we can't go
We don't
over
have
there and say
access to them.
anything. We're here. You're here, right? I mean, maybe you're in your city. But the feelings that we're having in response are two things that are beyond like our locale, for example. But when we're doing, let's say, somatic practices and we're putting in our bodies into positions where we're able to tap into that energy, what we can do is use our visualization and imagine ourselves expressing it towards the person that we really want it to be expressed with. Or we can also just have a witness. It doesn't have to be, let's say, the aggressor. It could be someone that we love and trust. But trauma healing needs a witness. Moving intense feelings that are really, I would say, some of the most difficult ones as humans. Grief and rage also needs a witness. And the more that we do that, like you were saying earlier, the more that we're able to like return back to a state where we actually have more capacity and we can handle more. But if we're in this state, more shitty things on top of more shitty things, you actually end up just starting to feel buried. And then that's where the hopelessness and the despair comes in. And that's like that lack of agency piece, I think, is so important when we can find safe ways, whether it's in private or with friends, to express. We prevent ourselves from being buried by all of the experiences that are happening and the emotions that come with them.
Wow. So let's do practice.
Yeah. Do you think we should share? I'm feeling a rage practice just because I feel like we're 100 and something days in. I'd say there's some rage in the
There's
air.
rage in the air. Yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
could go into what's happening today,
yeah. You
but
could share if you want to.
sure. So 1 million Gazans have been forced from the northern 90% of Gaza into Rafah, the southernmost point on the Egyptian border. Most of them are in tents, and Israel has begun carpet bombing Rafah.
Mm. And this on top of the 30,000 people who have already been martyred. This on top of too many amputations done without anesthesia. This on top of no food,
Yeah, I was going to say
water.
500,000 people in the final
Yeah,
stage before starvation.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for processing that, Alice. And I will invite you and everyone on this replay. If you would like to, as we move into this practice, I'm going to encourage standing, in part because when we're moving with rage, having access to our legs can be really helpful. Our legs are a really big part of our fight or flight response. In fact, a lot of those stress hormones are preparing you to run. So that's my recommendation. But if you are feeling tired, know that these practices, you can also amend them or modify to practice seated or lying down. I always want to make sure we're offering options for everyone, recognizing not everyone can stand at the moment. Okay. And for this practice, all you'll need is a space that's open enough to move. So just making sure that there's nothing maybe within your little 6-foot bubble that you might trip on or get hurt by. And then just tracking that you have access to a wall.
Access to a wall.
A wall, yeah.
I can't be on camera and have a wall.
No
Can we
worries,
go
no
off
worries.
camera?
I'll be on camera. So yeah, you're allowed to be off camera. Yeah, perfect. And then once you come into your choice of posture. For those of us standing, I'll invite you to have your feet at least hips width apart, potentially even wider. And so if you have been feeling perhaps ungrounded, a wider base might be really supportive. So just finding the placement of your feet that feels good to you. And then keeping a slight micro bend in the knees. We don't want to lock out the joints. And to begin, I'll invite us to just open up the arms, have the palms facing forward, and see if you can really open the chest. So as the arms extend, notice that mine are a little bit outwards. They're not directly on my thighs. So we're just trying to take up space. I'm standing almost like a star. And then I'll invite us to close the eyes. And know that if you're seated or lying down, you're welcome to modify and find this position in whatever way works for you. And then these first couple of moments with eyes closed, arriving into the posture, just noticing how you are showing up in your own body in this space today. And I'll invite you to start with a very gentle body scan, going from the top of your head down to your feet. Just doing a little check-in to say hello to these various parts of you. Noticing if there are any areas of tension and seeing if you can soften. And we'll start by taking 3 rounds of breath together. And since we're working with rage today, I'm going to invite us to breathe with some movement. So on the inhale, extend the arms out wide as you take a breath in. And as the palms slowly come together to touch above, see if you can reach the fullest lung capacity of your breath, maybe taking an extra sip. And as we exhale, we'll bend the knees and the arms will press downwards. And I really invite you to move slowly as if you're pressing against some resistance. And so we're already starting here to power up the arms and legs. And then we'll do that twice more. Inhale, extending the legs, extending the arms, really trying to stretch the fingers up to the ceiling, feeling the sideways get long. And as you exhale, as if you're pressing against resistance and gravity, slowly extending the arms out and bending the knees, allowing the sitting bones, the pelvis to lower. Maybe lowering a little more. And then one more time, deep breath in. And because we're moving slow, you're likely going to notice a little bit of a burn in the legs and the arms. And that's intentional. Exhale, bending the knees. Again, as we start to express rage, we're really just thinking about not only getting our bodies into these postures, but also how can we expend whatever stress hormones that are already in our bodies from the day that we've had from the information we processed. Now, your final one, letting the arms lay limp, and just taking a moment to check in. For example, I'm noticing my heart rate increased a little bit. My body temperature has gone up. My palms are a little sweaty. And I can almost certainly feel that there's more. So my body definitely has more I would like to know. So if that felt like enough for you, know that you can stay there and keep working on that. But I'd like to also offer one more practice for those of us who would like to take it a step further. So for this practice, we're going to be working with expressing our sacred no. And so how this will work is I'll invite you to now come over to your wall. And as you face your wall, take a moment to decide which foot is your dominant foot. So for me, it tends to be the right. If I were taking a step forward, I usually lead with my right. And so my right foot will be in front and my left foot will be behind. And so as you face the wall, placing your dominant foot forward and your left foot a little bit behind. And your feet are not on they're on railroad tracks. They're not on one line. So just making sure you have space for balance. And then I'll invite you to extend your arms outward and then adjust your footing so that when your arms are out in front of you, your palms can rest on the wall. You should have a slight bend in your knees. And so how this motion will work is as you inhale, straighten out the knees, lower the arms backwards, and we'll open up the chest. So this is one part of the flow. And when we exhale, bending the knees, we're going to push our weight forward, extend the arms, and press our weight into the wall. So just cycle through that a few times to really get comfortable with that in your body. Remembering as we inhale, really thinking about embodying sort of that soft open palm gesture throughout your body. You want to create space in the chest, extend the arm. And then as we exhale, that's when we're moving to more of that clenched fist in our bodies. Knee presses forward. You might be feeling your calf powering up on the back leg. You're sending the weight forward out of your hands and pressing into this wall. All right, so that is the movement. And then next, we're going to be layering on breath. So remember, when you come forward with the palms onto the wall, that's your exhale. And when we move into the practice, I'll invite you to practice exhaling with different levels of force, just depending on what you want to release. If you want to release a lot, you might release a very audible exhale. And for those of us who might just be starting to get in touch with our rage, you might want to start with just slow, full breaths and maybe building up to your comfort level. So inhale, open body stance. Exhale, pressing forward, forceful breath out of the mouth. So that's stage 2, movement and breath together. Step 3 is layering on the no. So as we inhale, we'll keep that open body stance. And when you exhale, as you come forward, send the weight, send the power out of your hands as you say no, either out loud or to yourself. If you're in a safe space, I really encourage you to say no out loud and perhaps play with projecting the volume. So the first one might be no, but the next one might be a little louder. No.
No.
Perfect. No. No. Yeah. Remembering to use as much energy to go through the wall as you can. And the last step here is to close the, you might keep the eyes closed or you might close them, just depending on you. But when you come forward and say no, I encourage you to visualize what you are saying no to. We're saying no to genocide. We're saying no to forced starvation and famine. We're saying no to the loss of indigenous people. What is it that you want to say no to? Really pull on that energy, connect with it. And as you come forward, really visualize sending that no, that power, that energy, the love that is inherent in your rage out of your arms, chest, and body and towards the thing you want to direct it to. No.
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 And you might stay for a moment and really press hard into the wall, visualizing what you're saying no to. And if you'd like, you can stay here pressing into the wall and just say no multiple times. Continuing to squeeze, powering up. No, no, no.
Yeah.
Once you feel complete, recognizing that you can do this practice for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You can do it once a day, twice a day, as many times as you need. Just remembering the 4 steps: movement, then adding breath, then adding on the voice, and then adding on a visualization. And so that's
Thank
a
you.
amended, shorter practice.
Shorter,
Whew, but
shorter
you know,
practice, longer interview.
yeah.
So very quickly, tell folks about your free gift and how they can stay in touch.
Yes. So my free gift is something I actually do every single month for free to the community, but it is a gift nonetheless. Every month I host community rest sessions on Zoom. They're typically hosted on a weekday evening, 8 to 9:15 Eastern. So that's 5 to 6:15 Pacific. And that's just a space where anyone who's interested in learning how to rest and learning how to slow down and feel safer in their bodies can come. Um, Often we explore a theme, and February dates will be released on the 1st. And the second announcement I have is just for anyone listening here who might identify as an Asian or Pacific Islander woman or femme or non-binary person. The spring 2024 cohort of my group program, Rewriting Our Rest Stories, which is a program for Asian identifying folks to break intergenerational cycles of burnout and experience liberation through rest. This is going to be the 4th cohort. So enrollment's going to begin in the middle of February. The cohort that is graduating this month, we got together in September and we were actually together throughout the horrifying unfolding since October 7th. And to be able to hold space for folks to rest and explore liberation in their bodies and beings in a time like this is just an honor that I feel so grateful to have. And I look forward to welcoming anyone who feels called to the spring cohort.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cassandra. Great conversation, great activity, and just really great connection.
Yeah. Thank you, Alice, for everything you do too.
You're welcome. All right, how do I stop recording? I always forget.